So today we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. I've got a very special guest, my beautiful wife, Lucy Thurman, here with me. And the reason Lucy is here with me is because I want to talk about boundaries. And Lucy and I have been talking about boundaries a lot and how you set boundaries within relationships, within our relationship, within friendships as well. And I think she'd be a perfect person just to have an open conversation with. So today we're just going to be having a conversation and taking it wherever it goes. So glad you guys are joining us, and I look forward to you guys seeing what we've got to say. Start anywhere. We talk about boundaries a pretty good amount, but I think everybody has different definitions of what a boundary actually is. So what does boundaries mean to you?
Boundaries for me are things that help preserve your sense of self and the things that you need to do to take care of yourself before anybody else. So it's just a reminder that you get up at the beginning of your day, you wake up in your body, you go to sleep at night in your body. So it's really important to do things to maintain your sense of self. And sometimes in this world, it's really easy to just get pulled in all these different directions, and people have a lot of expectations for you. And so it's just a chance to check in and say, what are my needs? What doesn't feel good? And also, when you're able to establish boundaries, I think it really sucks at first for the people you're doing it with, because it catches them off guard. They might feel hurt or frustrated, but I like to think in the long run, it can help maintain relationships, because then it kind of is like bumper rails on like when you're crossing a line, and just to how to continue to maintain a relationship.
Interesting. So boundaries are basically setting up, like you said, bumper rails. I love that. That's really good. Like when you're bowling, you have those boundaries so that you're staying in your lane.
Yeah.
So in a way, boundaries are to keep you in your own lane. And from what I'm hearing, boundaries are setting up those bumpers that are specific to your needs and to your happiness moving forward. And we're definitely going to talk about, when you set those up, what is that like and how difficult that is. But I guess just to emphasize or go deeper onto it, why are boundaries important towards living your best life or trying to find growth or happiness? Like why is it so important, I guess?
Well, I think something that I think should be brought into discussion is just different experience for like me versus you, because I feel like a lot of women feel like they if they are assertive and assert their needs, they're selfish, or they might be considered a bitch. And so it's a lot harder, I think, for women to do that. And I feel like to be happy and successful, boundaries are essential. And so there are probably a lot of women out there who just are people pleasers like myself, and feel like if they're not meeting the needs of all these other people around them and supporting them all they can, giving 100% all the time, that they're letting people down, and that they're not worthy because of that, or they're not enough because they're not constantly showing up 100% for everyone else. And I feel like we are maybe think that that's possible through social media, to just constantly be showing up 100% all the time. So I think we need to set boundaries to have a check-in with reality, that we can't always give 100% all the time.
Yeah, you can't do it all. You can't be there for everybody. And I think you made a really good point as far as the difference in boundaries between men and women. Because you're right, everybody individually has different boundaries, but there is, at least the way boundaries are perceived. Like I feel, at me being a male, I feel like I have an easier time, and maybe that's from society, of just telling people what I want to do and then going and doing it. Where I think, and this is a conversation that we'll probably have some other time as well, and we talked about it, is that for women sometimes, I think, and this is just from what you've told me, is that a lot of self-worth at times can come from what are you providing? Yeah, what am I doing to other people? What's my self-worth is tied to how other people might perceive me. So setting boundaries and saying, I don't want to go do this, or I need this from you, might come off completely differently if I said it than compared to if you said it.
Yeah, and I think I've always operated off this assumption that I don't know, there was a quote somewhere about people may not remember all these details about you, but they'll remember how they feel when they're with you. And if I can make people feel understood and accepted, then I am a worthy person. And so that I think is wonderful and all, but I am exhausted.
Yeah.
And I am reaching this point in my life where I want to be a little bit more selfish and just for putting what I need first. And I feel like there's been a lot of times in my life where I have been overextending and doing the most of trying to make sure other people feel accommodated. And now I'm reaching this point where I'm like, well, what are my needs? What are my wants?
Yeah, and you're right, it's exhausting. To try and please everybody is exhausting, and it takes away from what you're trying to do in your life. Like if you're constantly doing things that are going to make other people happy, and it's hurting you or making you unhappy, or just taking energy away from you, you're not able to live your fullest life. And in the end, if you don't have all the energy, you're not going to even be able to be a good friend. So it seems that setting those boundaries, setting that kind of fence around you, allows you to be your best so that you can give your best to other people. And
I feel like, kind of going off of that, what does being a good friend mean? Because if you're constantly working so hard to meet these surface level presentations, maybe by the time that someone needs you for something maybe a little deeper, you're just so exhausted, you don't handle it well, you kind of snap. And I feel like if we can all try to take care of our own baggage in a way where we're addressing it our own, I used to do this thing when crisis would come up, I would call friends before I even thought about it myself. And I didn't ask them if they were in a place to hear what was going on. Do you guys have the emotional capacity to talk about this? And, but when I stopped and assessed that I was probably crossing a boundary from them, I realized that I had to do this work on my own, and that I want my friends to do that for themselves. So if I can model that, I feel like I'm modeling that boundary, protecting that boundary.
That's good. And I think that leads me to another question, is that, what happens when, let's say, a relationship, whether it's you or me or a friendship, what happens not just for you, but between that relationship when you don't set clear boundaries? What is the effect, or what is something that you've noticed, or I guess just overall, what happens if you don't set those clear boundaries?
I feel like you can avoid those relationships.
What do you mean?
So, if you just don't want to address it, maybe what's that feeling because you're afraid there might be an explosion, or there's a falling out, or you guys just lose touch. I feel like, or it could lead to it escalating at the wrong time. Especially we live in a culture where there's a lot of drinking. We were trying to blow off steam. We both went to a college where the motto was work hard, play hard, and if you wait to those moments to address it, people's feelings get really hurt, and that's not what you intend. There's something wrong there that you might want to solve, but instead of solving it, you just kind of explode on the other person, and it doesn't get a chance to be resolved. And with most of my friendships, I really do want to preserve it. Even though I'm feeling exhausted, it's not that I want to lose these friendships, it's just I just need a little bit of time to prioritize myself.
And I think, you touched on a good point of it can lead to an explosion. If you're not dealing or setting up those boundaries early, and let's say somebody keeps doing something over and over again, and a boundary is basically letting that person know that, hey, this is a line where I don't want you to keep crossing this line.
Yeah, and if you continue to let it go unaddressed, the first time they hear it, it's you're about to stab them in the eye. This has just been happening so many times, and for them they're like, oh, you just brought this to light. Like it
To
just
them, they're confused.
they're confused, and you're maybe livid at that point because it just has continued to happen, but it's your responsibility to address it. And I know it's really hard to go there because you have to find the right time, you have to use the right tone, and that can be tough.
It can be, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later, just how to actually set boundaries and then what you do after that. But before we get into that, we're in a relationship. We've been together for 6 years.
You don't say.
We're married now. We've been married for 2 months. But throughout our relationship, we've had many tough conversations where we have to set certain boundaries with each other. I will share boundaries that I've had to set with you, but I would love to hear what boundaries you've really set with me, or I guess where those conversations have kind of led to sometimes.
I think the first thing that comes to mind with me is like when we're like cleaning up around the house, and like I think like especially before hosting, you pick up on the anxiety of me wanting to make sure our house is perfect, which is a whole nother thing to get into about perfection, because we talk about that a lot. Like when I'm trying to make sure everything's wonderful, even though like we all know there's nothing in this world that's perfect. But I have like, I don't know if I have a high standard of hygiene, but like when we're vacuuming, like I'm like, did you really get this area good? And maybe that's just an expectation. I don't know if that's a boundary.
Well, I think you said it. You tell me.
I'm like,
you say this is something that is.
when you do this, when
Yes.
you say you've cleaned the kitchen and you haven't, like you just kind of gone through vacuuming, which you're doing great.
That sounds
You're
like
doing great, because I brought up with you how like it's really important to me that you be thorough with vacuuming before we have guests over. And so like there was a moment where I thought you might get frustrated because I was maybe being bossy or critical of the job you had done before, but I was like, to prevent this from every time I see that nook where there's still crumbs, and I know you said you vacuumed, to prevent this from me like building resentment towards you, I brought it up like the second time I saw it. The first time I was like, well, is this worth bringing up? I'll wait and see if he does again. Because I know you have that rule of 3. Didn't wait till 3. Because like I don't want it. You just have to find that balance of like, maybe not the very first time unless it's a very serious thing that bothers you. But like I feel like cleanliness and things like that, I am better at setting boundaries with you with.
Yes, I think that was definitely one of them. I think one that I had to set with you was our energy levels. You were much more extroverted, I'm much more introverted. So when it comes to doing social things, sometimes I just need alone time. And I think at first it was very hard for me to even express that to you and like get it out and tell you that. And it caused a lot of like, not a lot of fights, but just conversations and contention where
Weekend after weekend.
yeah.
I'm like, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
Yes.
We'll do 3 things Saturday, 2 things Sunday, 1 thing
exhausted.
Friday.
And then Sunday, we would get to Sunday and you would want to still do something, or even if we weren't doing something, it was just you and me. I couldn't even give you my full self because I was just so drained to the point where, and I wasn't telling you that. So you would think like, why doesn't he want to, like, why aren't you doing this, or what's going on?
You'd like go into the office and just kind of.
So I had to set the boundary after lots of conversations. Like you said, it was not easy to talk about it, and it took multiple conversations. But now we have it where I can ask you and say, hey, I need alone time, or I need to go in the office for a little bit to work on stuff, or just to be alone, things like that. And I think setting that boundary has done wonders for us, because then we can then, you at least understand where I'm coming from. And once I get that alone time, I'm able to then give you more of myself. Whereas if I didn't, I would just be exhausted and a zombie. And so I think that's a boundary that I had to set that helped us out.
Yep. And one of the things that I've actually experienced with one of my close friends who just like has a lot of anxiety around like calling and texting, I feel like it's really been an interesting process for me because my feelings would get hurt when she wouldn't respond to texts. And I realized that that's not how she rolls with her form of communication. And I'm not ever going to get her to change who she is with that. And so it's up to me to accept that. And I'm sitting here with my feelings being hurt rather than even doing a deeper reflection of like, this is nothing personal. Why am I making this personal? So like something I was telling you earlier is just it's more difficult to deal with after the boundary has been set and reinforcing it than just setting the boundary in the first place, if you know what I mean.
Yes, and we will dive into that. And I think, talking about friends, I think that was the other topic I want to talk about is, there's boundaries in every relationship, whether you're dating somebody, married to somebody, but also friendships. Like the things that make friendships so strong are the boundaries that we set. I love the saying that fences make good neighbors. And, that's saying because our houses have these boundaries that we keep from our neighbors, and that's how we remain in our space and they remain in their space, and we have our own separate things, but then we're still neighbors, we're still friends. And I think it's the same thing with friendships, and it's setting those boundaries so that your friends know, hey, this is the line that is crossed. I don't want you to cross this line. So where in your friendships have you set or seen boundaries where maybe they weren't there and you had to establish them?
Well, like I said, with communication, with texting, I feel like a lot of my close friends live out of state, and so we, after college, have done a great job of texting and staying in the loop, but I feel like we developed this standard where we had to do weekly check-ins, and that's a lot. Now that it's been 5 years out, I'm realizing that expectation was a lot of pressure. And I think we all realized that, like some of my close friends, and have slowly just started to, if we can't reach that person, and we're upset about it, to delve deeper, because I feel like that we're projecting a lot there, and those expectations can sometimes be unrealistic, and to get mad over something like that, or let it feel like it speaks to your relationship maybe being not as close because you can't get in touch with them in that moment. At least that's where my mind would go sometimes, and I think that there's a lot to delve into there. But communication, what subjects to talk about if someone continues to revisit a subject, like politics is not always something that friends agree on, and so if one friend keeps sending are you going to come to this workshop, or discussing things that maybe not, politics is tricky, but when someone is giving off the vibe that maybe they're not interested in that, maybe continuing to revisit it over and over again. But at the same time, we have a rule where you can ask. Everyone has the right to ask, and everyone has the right to say no. And so it's complicated when we're talking about comfort, because it's not my responsibility. If you're uncomfortable, your discomfort is not my responsibility. And we live in a PC world where, other people's comfort is really taken into consideration a lot.
Yes, I think that's a great point. Your discomfort is not my responsibility. It's your responsibility to say something and set that boundary and say, hey, I don't like this line that you crossed.
But then again, I just said that revisiting things time and time again after someone's maybe not agreeing with it can create friction. So I'm really not sure where the line is with addressing people's discomfort. Do you get what I'm saying?
A little bit. But I think it's not so much maybe addressing people's discomfort, it's the idea that everybody's responsible for, if somebody keeps bringing something up over and over again, politics, an old relationship, and you don't feel like talking about it, it's your job to say, I don't think we should talk about this anymore, or you're making me uncomfortable with this conversation.
Ooh, you know what I just thought of? A boundary that I cross. Sometimes I am so protective of you that I will insert myself into things that I'm probably not included in.
That's
And because I'm like, I love them so much, I must protect him. But then you the other day were like, do you not think I can protect myself? And it's just like,
that's a good point.
Whoa, like,
I had to draw
he
that
can
line.
protect himself. And this is none of my business. And so that was really good for you to phrase it like that. I think, like we've been discussing, it's hard to hear, but it is stuck in my mind ever since. And so not fighting other people's fights for them. If your friend has an issue with someone, don't get involved. It's not your business.
Yeah.
And like,
unless they ask.
Yeah, but even if they do ask, is it really your place to insert yourself? And so I just feel like sometimes it's easy to get wrapped up in things that have nothing to do with us. Family issues, work issues. And how many times can we look at it and say, like, I probably can just step out of this situation and not get involved.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And I think that leads us kind of towards, how do you set boundaries? Like, what is the approach for saying? Because like you said before, it's difficult, and a lot of times when you bring something up, it's easy for the other person to be offended by it. You have to say, hey, I don't think you should talk about that. The other person's obviously probably not going to take it the best. Some people might, but there's always that chance. So how do you deliver that boundary to other people?
So there's, I think, a few different ways to do it. There's more passive and then more active ways. Like, for instance, if someone's trying to contact you beyond business hours, you know, you don't have to answer the phone and say, I don't work past the, you just never answer their call. And then when you do talk to them, you can say, yeah, this is my timeline.
So it's passive.
Yeah. Or there's silence, you know, someone who sends you a message about something that you're not comfortable talking about, just not responding. Silence sometimes can be the most powerful message rather than a whole conversation.
Yeah.
But for the people who may not be able to interpret that silence, I think doing kind of like a compliment sandwich. Hey, I love you a lot. You start with the bread, like, which is the sweet stuff, and then the meat is where you set the boundary. So it's really important to me that I feel like if someone, you've told me before that when people are like, Miles, take this shot, you're like, I'm good. You don't need to offer an explanation. You don't even engage in an explanation, because sometimes that means you're like open to discussing it. You just say, I'm good. And anyways, but with drinking, sometimes people like put pressure and you have to explain. But for instance, if I was setting a boundary that, hey, when I'm going out, I really would appreciate it if you didn't pressure me. It's nothing against you. Let them know it's something, a value that you're setting within yourself. It's not their behavior that's the issue. It's just something you're wanting to prioritize and you want their help. It's not a criticism. It's, this is what I'm working on, I'd like you to help. So kind of like a collaboration, a positive spin on it. And then you do the bread at the end, which is another sweet stuff. Because I care about you, that's why I brought this up, because I know I can come and talk to you about these things because I love you.
Yeah, and I love the collaboration part, because it's not a, hey, you do this and I don't like stop doing that. It's you are doing something that is affecting something that I am trying to work on, and I would appreciate it if you didn't do that, so I can still work on what I need to work on, get better.
Yeah, and then maybe at the end you can say, is there anything you're working on that you want me to be aware of?
Make it an open conversation, because that's a healthy thing. You know, if you've got boundaries, I'm sure there's something the other person doesn't like that you do. So.
And you could even say, if I ever cross that boundary, or a boundary that I don't know about, please come to me. Because I think boundaries are how we like maintain this.
Yeah, and you know, something that I've noticed, and I'm sure you've noticed in relationships, is that when you set those boundaries, your relationship actually grows. Because whether it's like space that you need, or telling a person what, like when they're crossing the line, that if they're your real friend, they're going to respect you and have more respect for you for saying that, and then hopefully that helps build the relationship stronger, because you guys have that mutual respect.
But I do think since we're talking about just like generally speaking, I do think that there are going to be some people who can't handle that boundary that you set. And it could lead to, like you said, if they're a good friend, like there are some friends out there who maybe don't have the best interest in place, and it could offend them to the point where they're like, I'm not about this. And that's too bad, but I do think that's always a possibility that some people may not receive it well in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, for me, and this is just my opinion, if you set a boundary and somebody's not really respecting it, then they don't respect you. Because if you're trying to say, this is important to me and it really upsets me when this happens and this is the boundary I want, as harsh as that might sound, I know we're friends. If they don't respect that, then I feel like that's disrespect towards the person setting the boundaries in a way.
And then that's a whole conversation about disrespect. And then like about the...
Yes, that goes deeper. So to finish it up, I think when you set a boundary, setting it is one thing. How do you then follow up? And I know it's something we've kind of discussed, or some of you said you've struggled with, and I've struggled with too, is, how do you continue to keep following? You keep bringing it up? I don't know, what is your approach as far as following up that boundary?
I think the second step of reinforcing it is the hardest part for me personally, because I want everyone to be okay all the time. And so when I set a boundary and then it actually happens and the person is disappointed, I didn't go out, or they're frustrated, I hate that reaction because I want everything to be good. But I'm working on realizing that I set that boundary for a reason, to take care of myself, prioritize myself. And if I go over there to apologize for the boundary I just set, it totally I feel like sometimes you're taking a step backwards when you go over there and you apologize, or you feel, maybe not feel guilty, I think that's okay. But really, I think just letting them deal with their own emotions about it and not feeling responsible for it.
Yeah.
You don't have to be rude. You can be gentle and say, I know that was hard for you, but I still feel this way. So I'm working on that big time. It's hard. I think it's the hardest part.
Yes, I agree. The follow-up is difficult, and I think you're right. I think it's, they may take it hard, but at the same time, they kind of have to be the people. You don't have to be the person that goes over there and says sorry or tries to solve that issue.
Let them solve it, because
that's really
that's their business.
Yeah.
That's none of your business. How they respond to it, what people's opinions about you are none of your business, really.
I agree.
If you think about it.
Yeah, and I think that's a great place to end it. So, awesome conversation.
Shake my hand.
Yeah, I guess so. Thanks for coming on. Hopefully we can continue some of these conversations. If you guys liked this conversation that we had, let us both know. That way we can continue these type of conversations. If there's anything else you think we should talk about, let us know, give us feedback, and I hope you guys have an awesome week.